The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the rookie officer's words echoed through the room. He stood at attention, facing the black judge, his back straight and his eyes filled with determination. "I don't believe this is how we should be proceeding," he declared, his voice sharp and unyielding. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his uniform pristine, yet his defiance was anything but polished. The judge, a woman of remarkable poise, sat behind the bench, her eyes steady but unreadable. The room was holding its breath. It wasn't uncommon for officers, especially rookies, to test the waters in courtrooms, especially with judges they didn't know. But this wasn't just any judge. She was known for her fairness, her unshakable authority, and for maintaining control over even the most chaotic situations. Yet here stood this young officer, unflinching and eager to challenge her authority in front of the whole courtroom. His fellow officers, who had been present to witness the proceedings, exchanged glances. They knew the rookie had a reputation for being headstrong, but this was taking things too far. The tension in the air was palpable. The judge, however, did not flinch. She simply looked at the officer with a calm gaze, her expression almost serene, as if the challenge were not a challenge at all. Her silence seemed to stretch out, as though it were waiting for something, waiting for him to realize what he had just done. The rookie's defiance was met with stillness. The room waited for the judge's reaction, everyone unsure whether she would call the officer out, dismiss him, or perhaps do something none of them had ever seen before. "What do you think you're doing?" The question came from one of the officers in the back, his voice low but sharp, as if to warn the rookie that there was a line that should not be crossed. But the rookie's gaze never wavered from the judge. His stance remained firm, his belief in his own righteousness growing with every passing second. This was his moment. He was going to make a stand. To prove that he wasn't going to be pushed around. The judge's voice finally broke the silence, smooth and unwavering. "You've made your point, officer. But you misunderstand the nature of your role here today." There was no anger in her tone, no frustration, just a quiet firmness that only a few could master. The officer's chest swelled with pride as he prepared to make his next move. He wasn't going to back down, not now, not when he had the opportunity to prove something to his peers, to the court, and most importantly, to himself. The judge did not raise her voice, but her presence filled the room, quiet as it was. She had faced far worse than this in her career, far greater challenges, many of them tied to the very fabric of the justice system itself. Yet, she did not lose her composure. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving the officers. "You see," she continued, "this is not about proving anything to anyone in this room. This is about upholding something far greater. Something more than your pride." Her words hung in the air like a challenge of their own. The rookie officer didn't understand. He didn't understand the gravity of the situation, nor did he grasp the weight of the words spoken by the judge. To him, this was a simple matter of proving his mettle. He wasn't intimidated by her experience or her authority. If anything, he saw it as an obstacle to overcome, a barrier in his path that had to be pushed aside. The judge's voice grew softer, almost a whisper, but there was a sharpness to it now. "What you fail to realize, officer, is that this isn't about you. It's about something bigger. And your actions today, they reflect that." The rookie officer, still defiant, took a step forward, daring her to challenge him. But the judge remained seated, calm and unbothered, her gaze never leaving him. Her confidence was evident, but not in the way the rookie had expected. She wasn't trying to overpower him, not through force or through words. She was simply standing her ground. The room, once filled with quiet murmurs and shifting gazes, now felt like a storm was brewing. The tension between them was thick, and every person in that room could feel it. Something was about to break, and no one was certain of what the fallout would be. The rookie officer stood there, pride in his chest, but as he looked into the judge's calm eyes, something shifted inside him, a flicker of doubt, a nagging sense that he might have overstepped in a way he couldn't undo. But it was too late now. His stance was locked, his pride refusing to let him retreat. The judge's expression softened ever so slightly, not with empathy or pity, but with the quiet wisdom that comes with experience. She had seen so much more than this. Far worse challenges, but also greater moments of transformation. She knew this moment. This exact moment would be a turning point for both of them. And then, without warning, she spoke again, this time with the finality of someone who had already seen the future. What happens next is not for you to decide. But you will see soon enough. The rookie officer was still standing, but now he felt the weight of the room, the weight of her words, bearing down on him. It was only then that he realized he wasn't in control, not of this situation, and maybe not even of himself. But it was too late to turn back. As the rookie officer stood there, still defiant, something within him seemed to falter, just for a moment. But the judge, cool and collected, did not show even a flicker of acknowledgement. She had seen countless situations like this before, young officers brimming with arrogance, eager to prove their worth, often at the expense of those around them. But she had learned long ago that authority was not something that could be forced. It had to be earned, and it had to be respected. The courtroom was quiet now, the only sound the soft shuffle of feet as onlookers shifted in their seats, their eyes flicking between the officer and the judge. The air was thick with anticipation, and a palpable sense of discomfort began to seep in. People could feel the impending collision, though they were unsure who would come out on top. The judge leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving the rookie officer. It was a quiet power that seemed to permeate the entire room, an authority that was never in question. She had spent years in the court system, years fighting for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against her. She was no stranger to adversity, especially when it came in the form of disrespect from those who felt entitled to challenge her. She was a black woman, an undeniable force in a system that had often been hostile to her, both because of her race and her gender. But she had never let that stop her. Her rise to the position she held now had not been easy, nor had it been free of opposition. But the very things that others used to try to bring her down only strengthened her resolve. She had learned the value of resilience, of standing firm in the face of adversity, and it was that unwavering resolve that now stood between the rookie officer and his misguided challenge. With a controlled breath, she spoke, her voice calm but carrying the weight of experience. "Officer, you misunderstand the role you play here. This is not about proving who is stronger, who is right, or who can outlast whom. This is about justice. This is about doing what is right, not what is convenient or what makes you feel powerful." Her words were not harsh. There was no anger in her voice. There didn't need to be. The simple truth of them was enough to make anyone in the room think twice. The rookie officer, still standing with his chest puffed out, tried to maintain his composure. He had expected a battle of wills, but now he was beginning to realize that this was not a fight he could win in the way he had imagined. His confidence began to waver as the judge continued. She was not playing into his bravado. Instead, she was showing him a path he hadn't considered, a path that involved understanding, respect, and humility. The judge had learned long ago that true power came not from dominating those around you, but from maintaining control over your own actions and emotions. She wasn't about to stoop to the officer's level of arrogance. Instead, she would give him the space to see the error of his ways. To grow. "Do you understand the gravity of your actions, officer?" the judge asked, her gaze still steady. "This courtroom is not a place for personal vendettas or ego. It is a place for justice, and justice cannot be blind to respect." The rookie officer stood motionless. His earlier bravado seemed to be evaporating, replaced by a creeping sense of doubt. What had started as an act of defiance, a challenge to the authority of the judge, was slowly beginning to feel more like a mistake. But there was no turning back. Not now. The judge's calm demeanor was now almost unsettling to him. It was as if she had already won, without raising her voice, without making a scene, she had taken control of the situation. She was not backing down, but she was not escalating things either. Instead, she was calmly waiting for him to make his next move. The tension in the room grew thicker, the air charged with the weight of the confrontation. Yet, amid it all, the judge remained as composed as ever. She had dealt with moments like this throughout her career. This rookie officer was not the first to challenge her, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. What mattered was how she handled it. In the past, the judge had faced much worse: racial prejudice, dismissive colleagues, and opponents who tried to discredit her every step of the way. But through it all, she had learned the true meaning of resilience. She had learned that real strength came from standing firm without having to raise a hand or shout a single word. She had earned her place in the courtroom, not through force, but through understanding the system, through working within it, and most importantly, by not allowing it to break her spirit. She knew that this rookie officer, though filled with pride and arrogance, would eventually come to realize the truth. But for now, the courtroom held its breath, waiting for the rookie officer's next move. Would he back down? Would he apologize? Or would he double down on his challenge, risking everything in the process? For the judge, the outcome was already clear. The only question left was how the officer would handle the inevitable lesson that awaited him. The rookie officer's eyes narrowed as he stood there, his jaw clenched tightly. The judge's calm words had shaken him, but his pride was still intact, at least on the surface. He wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, make him feel small. After all, he had earned his spot, hadn't he? This was his moment to show his colleagues, his superiors, and the judge herself that he was not just another rookie who would sit back and follow orders. No, he was someone who would make an impact. Raised in a tough neighborhood, he had fought for everything he had. He had learned early on that the world wasn't going to give him anything, and if he wanted respect, he had to take it. The rookie officer believed that his defiance was a sign of strength, a way of asserting his place in a world that had often overlooked people like him. He was determined to rise above the limitations that had once been imposed on him. This courtroom, this judge, were just another hurdle for him to overcome. He wasn't afraid of the consequences, because he had never been afraid of challenges. To him, this was just another challenge in a long line of them. He had earned his badge, and now, he would earn the respect of this judge, whether she wanted to give it to him or not. As the silence stretched on, the rookie officer's chest puffed up, and he took a small step forward, as though daring the judge to react. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. He thought about all the struggles he had faced to get to this point. The long nights studying, the intense training, the sacrifices he had made to join the force. He had fought to be here, and no one was going to make him feel inferior. But beneath his bravado, there was something else, a flicker of doubt that he quickly shoved away. Was he really in the right? Should he have challenged her like this? These questions lingered in his mind, but his pride was louder, and his ego refused to let him show any sign of weakness. The judge, on the other hand, remained as calm as ever. She was no stranger to challenges, especially from younger officers who had yet to understand the weight of their responsibilities. But where others might have felt anger or frustration, the judge only felt a quiet sadness for the rookie officer. She could see through his defiance, see the insecurities behind it, and it saddened her that he didn't yet understand the true meaning of respect. She had earned her place through years of hard work and sacrifice, and she knew that respect could never be demanded. It had to be earned, not through arrogance, but through understanding. She had once been like him, young, eager to prove herself, and blind to the deeper truths of the world. But with time, she had learned that true strength was about restraint, about knowing when to speak and when to listen. "Officer," she began again, her voice still smooth and steady. "You are so focused on proving your strength that you are blind to the true strength of this moment. You've chosen to challenge me, but you've forgotten the most important thing." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle in. "The law, and the pursuit of justice, are bigger than you and I. They are bigger than our egos." Her words cut through the rookie's confidence, but they didn't shatter it completely. He still believed in his cause, believed that he was standing up for something. But what, exactly, was he fighting for? His pride? His ego? His position? He hadn't thought about it in those terms. He had simply wanted to prove that he wasn't afraid, that he wasn't intimidated by the judge, but now, a small voice in the back of his mind asked if that was enough. He glanced around the room. His fellow officers were watching him closely. Some looked uneasy, while others, he could tell, were waiting for him to back down. He wasn't sure what they expected from him anymore. Did they expect him to admit he was wrong? Did they expect him to show some humility? He wasn't ready to give them that satisfaction. Not yet. But the judge's calm demeanor had an effect on him. Every time she spoke, it was as if the room itself took on a different weight. Her words were not just a response to his challenge, but an invitation to reflect, a reflection he didn't know he needed. Was she right? Had he misunderstood the situation? Was he so wrapped up in his own need for respect that he had forgotten the real purpose of being there? He didn't have the answers, not yet, but the flicker of doubt had become a flame. His bravado was beginning to crack, just a little, and for the first time in the confrontation, he didn't feel entirely sure of himself. The judge, sensing his hesitation, didn't press further. She simply waited, her silence more powerful than any words could be. She knew that if the rookie officer was going to learn anything today, it would have to come from within. She couldn't force him to understand the lesson. He would have to discover it on his own. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath, and the rookie officer, standing at the crossroads of pride and humility, was left with a choice. Would he continue down the path of arrogance, or would he finally let go of his need to prove something to everyone and instead prove something to himself? The judge was no longer just a barrier to his ambitions. She was now a mirror, reflecting back the officer's own struggle, his own doubts, and the challenge he had yet to face, not of her authority, but of his own inner conflict. And it was a battle he hadn't yet won. The rookie officer's eyes flitted briefly to his colleagues, his eyes searching for any kind of reassurance. There was none. The room was quiet, too quiet. Everyone could feel the shift in the air, the palpable tension between the young officer and the judge. The eyes of the entire courtroom were now on him, watching as he stood frozen in the middle of a fight he hadn't fully understood. For the judge, this moment was just another part of the job, though no less important. She had been tested in ways most people could not imagine. In her career, she had faced systemic racism, personal loss, and professional obstacles that seemed insurmountable at the time. Yet, time and again, she had prevailed. But this rookie officer, this young man full of pride and arrogance, was proving to be something different. She saw potential in him, but also a great deal of confusion. He had so much to learn, but the question was whether he would learn it now, or if he would push back against it. The courtroom clock ticked on, the seconds stretching into what felt like an eternity. The judge, unmoving and calm, looked at the officer, waiting. She was a woman of few words, and those she chose to speak carried weight. She knew that a moment of silence, of stillness, could be more effective than 100 scolding remarks. The rookie officer, still standing in defiance, was struggling to find his next move. He wasn't sure if he should apologize, double down on his stance, or simply back away. "You have nothing to prove here, officer," the judge said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence. "Except to yourself." The words hit him harder than he anticipated. It wasn't about his colleagues, or about the respect he thought he deserved from them. It wasn't about impressing anyone in the room or making a statement. It was about his own growth, his own character. But could he let go of the pride that had carried him so far? He shifted his weight, a slight movement that was barely noticeable to those around him but that spoke volumes to the judge. She could see the internal struggle written on his face, the moment where he realized he had crossed a line, but wasn't sure how to step back from it. "Is this how you want to start your career?" the judge continued, her tone still gentle but firm. "With defiance, rather than understanding? With arrogance, rather than humility?" The rookie officer swallowed hard, his throat dry. The judge's words stung more than he expected. He had been so focused on making a name for himself, on being seen as strong, that he had never stopped to think about the deeper implications of his actions. He had no idea that a simple courtroom challenge could have such profound consequences, not just for him, but for everyone around him. He didn't know it yet, but this moment was about to define the rest of his career. "Look around you, officer," the judge said, gesturing subtly to the room. "This courtroom is a place for justice, not for battles of ego. Every person here is part of a larger story, one that goes beyond your personal struggles." Her voice softened, but the weight of her words carried even more power. The rookie officer's hands began to tremble, but he fought it, refusing to show any sign of weakness. Still, he could not ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut, the uncertainty that had taken root deep within him. What had started as a challenge against a perceived weakness in the judge's authority was now beginning to feel like a challenge against his own values. He thought back to his training, to all the hours spent learning the law, understanding procedures, and preparing for moments like this. But none of it had prepared him for the emotional weight of what he was facing now. He had come into this room thinking that strength meant challenging authority, asserting his dominance. But now he was realizing that true strength meant something different. It was about knowing when to hold back, when to listen, and when to admit that you might not have all the answers. His gaze met the judge's, and for the first time since he had walked into the courtroom, he didn't see an opponent. He saw someone who had been through the fires and had emerged stronger for it. The realization was jarring. She wasn't just a judge, she was a mentor in a way he hadn't even considered. And in this moment, she was teaching him more than he could have ever imagined. For the first time, the rookie officer felt a flicker of doubt about his own approach. It wasn't that he had been wrong about wanting to make a name for himself, it was the way he had gone about it. He had been too focused on the wrong things, ego, pride, and proving himself to others. Now, he was learning that the true measure of a person's character wasn't in their defiance, but in their humility. The room remained silent as the standoff lingered. The rookie officer felt the weight of the judge's words sinking in deeper, and for the first time since he had entered the courtroom, he wasn't sure how to respond. This wasn't a situation he could simply power through. This was something that required thought, introspection, and, above all, change. The judge, having seen the change in the officer's expression, didn't push him further. She knew that the lessons he needed to learn couldn't be forced. They had to come from within. And for now, the rookie officer would have to wrestle with his own conscience, his own pride, until he was ready to accept the truth. But the tension in the room had not eased. The standoff was still present, but now it felt like something much more profound. It wasn't just a challenge to the judge's authority anymore, it was a battle between who the rookie officer thought he was and who he could become. The next few moments would decide the course of the rest of his career. But no matter what he chose, the rookie officer would never forget the quiet strength of the judge who had shown him a better way. The courtroom doors opened with a soft creak, and the room seemed to exhale collectively as the tension eased, though the aftermath of the standoff between the rookie officer and the judge would echo far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Word of the confrontation spread quickly, as such things always did. In a matter of hours, news outlets picked up on the incident, and it became a topic of heated debate. The question on everyone's lips, who was in the right? The media, as always, had a way of twisting every angle to fit a narrative. On one hand, there were those who saw the rookie officer as a hero, a man challenging the status quo, standing up to the entrenched powers that be. To them, He was a symbol of youthful defiance, a sign that the system could no longer be trusted to handle things with the same old, tired methods. In a world where traditional authority was being questioned at every turn, his actions resonated with those who felt the same way. They saw in him the courage to fight against a system they believed was broken, a system that often kept them down. On the other hand, there were those who were appalled by his behavior. They viewed him as disrespectful, as someone who had no understanding of the delicate balance required to serve in a courtroom. To them, the judge represented the embodiment of the law, a steady, unshakable presence that had earned her place through hard work and integrity. The rookie's challenge of her authority was seen as a direct attack on the very principles that held society together. They believed his arrogance had no place in such an important institution, and that he had no right to undermine a woman who had fought so hard to be where she was. Social media was abuzz with opinions. Comment threads were filled with passionate arguments, each side offering their own take on the events that had unfolded. Some called for the rookie officer's removal, saying that he had no business serving in a position of power if he couldn't show respect. Others defended him, claiming he had every right to question the system. The judge, for her part, stayed out of the media spotlight, maintaining her usual composure, but it was clear that the events in the courtroom had stirred something deep within her. As the story continued to unfold in the public eye, the rookie officer found himself at the center of it all. His phone rang constantly, but not with congratulations, rather, with questions. Questions from fellow officers, from his family, from friends. Everyone wanted to know what had really happened, what was going through his mind in that moment of confrontation. He was interviewed by reporters, who probed into his actions, asking if he felt justified in challenging the judge, and what he thought of the judge's calm response. The officer's answers, at first, were confident and assured. He stood by his actions, saying that he had simply done what he believed was right in the moment. But as the days passed, the rookie officer began to feel the weight of the fallout. He was no longer certain of his own answers. The words of the judge continued to echo in his mind. "You misunderstand the role you play here." What role, exactly, was he playing? Was he a defender of the law, or was he just another person trying to assert his dominance in a place where he should have been learning humility? He found it hard to focus, his mind always drifting back to that courtroom and the moment when he had crossed a line he hadn't even known existed. The defiance that had fueled him that day now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a creeping doubt that gnawed at his confidence. In private moments, he wondered if he had lost the respect of his colleagues. He could already hear the whispers in the hallways. He had been the talk of the office, and not in the way he had hoped. But more than that, he was beginning to realize that the respect he had craved from others didn't matter as much as he had thought. What mattered now was whether he could respect himself. His thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when his supervisor called him into his office. The rookie officer walked in, his stomach tied in knots, uncertain of what would come next. His supervisor, a gruff but fair man, looked up from his desk as the officer sat down. "I've been following this situation closely," the supervisor began, his voice neutral. "And I want to make one thing clear. There's no place for arrogance in this profession. Respect is something that must be earned, not demanded. You've got potential, kid, but this," he paused, gesturing to the reports and media coverage on his desk, "this doesn't reflect well on you." The rookie officer's heart sank. He had expected a reprimand, but hearing it so directly, so plainly, stung. "I know," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were doing what you thought was right," the supervisor agreed, his voice softening. "But that's the problem. You need to learn when to listen, when to stand back and take a moment to understand. The law isn't about being right or wrong, it's about doing what's best for the people you serve. And sometimes that means swallowing your pride and putting your personal feelings aside." The rookie officer sat in silence, absorbing his supervisor's words. It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was exactly what he needed to hear. The weight of his actions was sinking in, and for the first time, he saw the judge in a new light, not as an adversary, but as a figure who had been trying to teach him something all along. In the days that followed, the rookie officer began to change, slowly but surely. He attended training sessions with a new perspective, his focus now on humility, listening, and learning. The public outcry, the opinions, the media storm, they all started to feel distant, irrelevant. What mattered now was his own growth. And the rookie officer knew, deep down, that he had a long way to go. But change had begun. And for the first time since that fateful day in the courtroom, he felt like he was on the path to something better. Days turned into weeks, and the ripple effects of the rookie officer's defiant actions in the courtroom began to settle into a harsh reality. What had started as a brief moment of tension between him and the judge had grown into something that would shape the rest of his career, whether he was ready for it or not. He had expected a momentary confrontation, a small challenge, but in reality, he had ignited a firestorm that would prove far more difficult to extinguish. The media storm continued to swirl, but now, instead of excitement, it began to feel like a relentless wave crashing over him. The officer's name had become synonymous with defiance, and while some still praised him for standing up to authority, the majority questioned his judgment. The public eye had been unforgiving. They saw an officer who had not only challenged the authority of a judge but had done so without understanding the weight of his actions. In the courtroom, the judge remained silent. She had made her position clear, and now she focused on her work. She had seen this before, people who made rash decisions, who let their emotions dictate their actions. She had known that the rookie officer would be left to wrestle with the consequences of his choices. And now, as he faced the fallout, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of sorrow and hope. He had the potential to grow, to learn. But only if he was willing to confront his mistakes head-on. The rookie officer, meanwhile, was left to face his own reflection. He had expected to prove himself, to make a name in the force, but instead, he had shown a side of himself that he now regretted. What had started as a moment of ego had turned into a prolonged period of self-doubt. He found himself questioning everything, his actions, his motivations, and even his place within the system he had once believed in so fiercely. The first real consequence came when he was called into the chief's office. Sitting across from the chief, the officer could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. This wasn't a conversation about his career advancement or a simple reprimand. This was the moment when everything he had worked for could come crumbling down. "Officer, your actions have put us in a difficult position," the chief began, his voice stern. "The department has received a lot of attention due to the incident with Judge. And, frankly, most of it isn't favorable. You've caused a disruption, not just in the courtroom, but in the public's trust in this department. You can't expect to continue without consequences." The rookie officer nodded, his throat dry. He had expected this. He had known the consequences would be inevitable, but now, sitting in front of the chief, he could feel the weight of it more than ever. His mind raced with thoughts of what had led him here, the rash decision, the pride, the arrogance that had fueled his actions. He had come to realize that those had been the wrong choices, but now, there was no undoing the damage. "You've got potential, officer," the chief continued, his tone softening slightly. "But potential alone won't get you far in this line of work. You need to learn to be responsible, to be aware of how your actions affect the people around you. You don't get to pick and choose when to respect authority. That's not how it works. And right now, you've got a lot to prove to regain the trust you've lost." The words hit harder than the officer had expected. They weren't meant to punish, but rather to teach him the lesson he had failed to learn in the moment of defiance. The chief wasn't giving up on him, but the rookie officer could sense that the grace he had been afforded in the past had worn thin. "I understand, sir," the officer said quietly, his voice thick with regret. He had never imagined his journey would lead him here, to this moment where the weight of his pride had come crashing down on him. But now, as the consequences of his actions became clear, he realized that this was a pivotal moment, a crossroads that would determine what kind of officer, and what kind of person, he would become. The chief nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his expression. "You'll have to take a step back for now. No major assignments. You'll be working with a mentor, someone who can help you see things from a different perspective. We can't afford to have someone on the team who doesn't understand how to carry themselves with humility." The officer felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just a temporary setback, this was a clear demotion, a reflection of the consequences he had to face. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges, and he would have to work harder than ever to regain the respect he had lost. But in that moment, he knew something had shifted. The rookie officer had been forced to confront the reality of his actions, to understand that his defiance had cost him more than just a moment of pride. It had cost him the trust of his colleagues, the respect of the public, and, most painfully, his own sense of self. Over the next few days, the rookie officer found himself in the company of his mentor, a seasoned officer who had seen it all. The mentor didn't lecture him, didn't berate him for his mistake. Instead, he let the officer speak, letting him vent and reflect on what had happened. And as the days wore on, the officer began to see the lessons in his failure. He wasn't alone. In this, he was part of a team that depended on mutual respect and understanding. The consequences were harsh, but they were not the end. In a way, they were just the beginning. The rookie officer had to confront his weaknesses, and through that process, he would begin to rebuild. It wasn't going to be easy, and the path forward would be filled with challenges. But for the first time since that fateful day in the courtroom, he felt the stirrings of something deeper, humility, understanding, and the first steps toward becoming the officer he had always wanted to be. The weeks that followed the confrontation in the courtroom were a quiet storm for the rookie officer. He had been removed from the front lines, placed in a shadow of his former role, working closely with his mentor. It wasn't the kind of lesson he had wanted to learn, but it was the one that he desperately needed. There were no more opportunities to prove himself in the courtroom. No more chances to make bold statements. Instead, he spent his days on routine patrols, learning the ins and outs of the job in ways he had never expected. At first, it felt like a punishment. His pride had taken a serious hit, and every day seemed to drag on, reminding him of the mistake he had made. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. His mentor, a man of few words, didn't try to teach him through lectures or hard lessons. He simply allowed the rookie to experience the job in its purest form, without the need to impress anyone, without the need to perform. It was a subtle shift, but one that began to ease the officer's internal tension. The rookie officer began to see the truth in his mentor's approach. The world he had been trying to prove himself in wasn't a stage to be dominated, but a community to be understood. As they walked through the streets, patrolling areas where people faced real struggles, where crime was a part of daily life, the rookie saw his job in a new light. It wasn't about rising above others. It was about serving the people. Protecting them. Being a presence they could trust, not someone they feared. One afternoon, as they made their way through a neighborhood that had been struggling with a rising crime rate, the rookie officer found himself in a conversation with a local store owner. The man had seen his fair share of officers come and go, but something about the rookie seemed different now. He wasn't as eager to rush through his patrols, and his eyes weren't as focused on trying to gain approval from his mentor. He was actually listening, asking questions, trying to understand. "I've seen a lot of officers come and go," the store owner said, his voice rough with years of hardship. "They come in here with all their rules, their badges, and they think they're the answer. But they don't know us. They don't know our struggles." The rookie officer paused, absorbing the man's words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone softer than it had been before. "Most of them, they just want to show they're in charge," the owner continued, wiping his hands on a rag. But what they don't get is that we don't need someone to be in charge. We need someone who listens. Someone who understands. Someone who actually cares. The rookie officer stood there, stunned by the man's candidness. It wasn't the kind of conversation he had expected. He had always thought that as long as you wore the uniform, as long as you had the authority, you would command respect. But this man had just told him that respect wasn't earned by flexing authority. It was earned by connection. His mentor, who had been watching quietly from the side, gave a small nod of approval. The officer wasn't ready to speak just yet, but he could feel the shift within him. For the first time, he was beginning to see the job not as a performance, but as a responsibility. A responsibility that required him to listen, to empathize, and to understand those he was sworn to protect. As they walked away from the store, the rookie officer's mind was racing. He hadn't realized how much of his approach had been shaped by his ego, the need to prove himself, the need to be seen as strong, unyielding. He had failed to see that strength wasn't about being unmovable. Strength was about knowing when to bend, when to yield, and when to listen. That evening, as they sat down for a quiet dinner, the rookie officer reflected on everything he had learned. The judge's words came rushing back to him. This is not about proving who is stronger, who is right, or who can outlast whom. This is about upholding something far greater. The rookie officer realized now that the judge hadn't just been speaking to him about the courtroom. She had been speaking to him about life itself. About how the true measure of a person wasn't in how much they could assert their power or challenge authority, but in how they treated others. The lesson wasn't just about respecting the law, it was about respecting the people the law was meant to serve. The rookie officer looked at his mentor across the table, wondering how much this man had known all along. How much had he been teaching without saying a word? The mentor smiled faintly, as though reading his thoughts. "You're starting to get it," the mentor said simply, his voice quiet but filled with meaning. The officer nodded slowly. "Yeah. I think I am." And in that moment, he understood that he hadn't just been learning about law enforcement or following orders. He had been learning about the core of what it meant to be a man of honor. To be someone who earned respect, not through force, but through integrity, humility, and understanding. For the first time since that fateful day in the courtroom, the rookie officer felt like he had found his footing. The path ahead wasn't easy, and he knew he had a long way to go. But now, he felt ready. Ready to step forward with the lessons he had learned, and with the understanding that true strength wasn't about how hard you could push, but how deeply you could listen. The day had come for the rookie officer to face the judge again. He had spent the last few weeks reflecting on his actions, learning from his mentor, and understanding the lessons that had been so carefully laid out before him. He had come to terms with his past arrogance, his misguided sense of superiority, and the damage he had done, not just to his reputation, but to the relationships around him. But now, he needed to face the one person who had truly challenged him, the one who had shown him that the law was not just about power and control, but about respect, humility, and service. He stood outside the judge's chambers, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind was clear now, and he knew what he had to do. He had to apologize, not just for his actions in the courtroom, but for the way he had disrespected her authority. For the way he had misunderstood the nature of his role, and for the way he had failed to recognize the strength that she had shown in the face of his challenge. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. "Come in," came the judge's calm voice from the other side. He entered slowly, his footsteps heavy as he walked toward the judge's desk. She looked up at him, her expression as unreadable as ever, but there was a slight softening in her eyes that told him she was waiting for him to speak. "Judge," he began, his voice steady but filled with a sense of humility. "I owe you an apology. For everything." The judge's eyes never left his face as he continued. "I was wrong," he said. "I thought I had something to prove. I thought defying you in that courtroom would make me stronger, but I was just blinded by my own ego. I didn't understand what I was really doing. I didn't understand what you were trying to teach me." He paused, his throat tight as he fought to keep his emotions in check. This wasn't just about making amends. It was about coming to terms with his own growth, with the mistakes he had made, and with the path he needed to take moving forward. "I was so focused on proving myself that I missed the point," he continued, his voice quieter now. "But I see it now. I understand. You weren't just trying to teach me about the law. You were trying to teach me about respect, about the kind of officer I need to be. Not one who challenges authority for the sake of ego, but one who listens, who learns, and who respects those around him." The judge listened in silence, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of approval. She had been waiting for this moment, had known it would come eventually, but it still filled her with a quiet sense of pride to hear the rookie officer take responsibility for his actions. "You've come a long way," she said softly, her tone no longer firm, but filled with a kind of understanding that only comes with experience. "It takes strength to admit when you're wrong. More strength, sometimes, than it does to fight." The rookie officer nodded, the weight of her words settling deep within him. He had learned that strength wasn't about dominating others. It wasn't about making others submit to your will. It was about self-awareness, about knowing when to step back, and when to listen, not just to others, but to yourself. There was a long silence between them, and in that silence, the rookie officer felt a shift inside him. The weight of his past actions, the consequences of his pride, were still present, but now they felt lighter. They weren't the defining factors of his life. He had learned. He had grown. "I'll never forget this," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you. For not giving up on me." The judge offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I didn't give up on you, officer. I gave you space to learn. The rest was up to you." And with that, the rookie officer knew that he had truly made a step forward. This wasn't just about mending a relationship with the judge, it was about mending the relationship he had with himself. He had been humbled, but in that humility, he had found something far more powerful than he had ever known before. As he left the judge's chambers, his heart felt lighter, and for the first time in a long while, he felt confident in who he was becoming. He had learned that the road to respect wasn't paved with defiance and arrogance, but with understanding, humility, and the willingness to grow. The road ahead wasn't easy. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, more decisions to make. But now, with the lessons he had learned, he felt ready to face whatever came his way. It had been several months since the rookie officer's moment of reflection and his conversation with the judge. He had learned a great deal since that day, the importance of humility, the necessity of listening, and the true essence of respect. His career had taken a new direction, one that was no longer focused on his personal ambitions or ego, but on his role as a servant to the law, and to the people he had sworn to protect. The judge's words still echoed in his mind. True strength is about knowing when to step back, when to listen, and when to admit you don't have all the answers. That lesson had been a turning point, not just for his career, but for his life. The rookie officer had faced many tests, both within the confines of the law and in his personal life. His interactions with his colleagues had changed as well. No longer the cocky, overconfident rookie, he had become someone others turned to for guidance, someone who had learned from his mistakes. The same colleagues who once whispered behind his back now respected him, not because of his rank or his title, but because of the man he had become. But the most important transformation had come within him. He no longer saw himself as someone who had to prove his worth to others. Instead, he understood that his true worth was found in his actions, his integrity, and his ability to show respect for everyone, no matter their status. The arrogance that had once defined him had been replaced with a quiet confidence, rooted in the lessons he had learned. One evening, the officer found himself back at the courthouse, standing outside the same courtroom where it all began. The building, though just a structure of stone and glass, held so much significance for him. It was here that he had been tested, not only by the judge but by his own pride. It was here that he had learned the hard way that true strength wasn't about defiance, but about understanding the balance of power, humility, and service. The rookie officer now stood at a crossroads, but it wasn't the same crossroads as before. He wasn't here to challenge the system or to prove his own worth. Instead, he had come to visit the judge again, to thank her, one last time, for the lessons she had taught him. When he entered her chambers, the judge looked up from her desk, her expression still calm and composed, though there was a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there the first time they met. The officer could tell she had been watching his progress, and she smiled faintly as he approached. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "For everything. For not giving up on me. For showing me what it really means to be an officer, and what it really means to be a man." The judge nodded, as though she had been expecting this moment all along. "You've learned more than just how to be an officer," she said. "You've learned how to be a person of integrity. That's what really matters in the end." The officer stood in silence for a moment, reflecting on all that had brought him to this place. The pride that had once consumed him had been replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. He now understood that it wasn't enough to simply enforce the law. It was about protecting the principles behind it, principles like fairness, respect, and understanding. "You'll go far," the judge continued. "But never forget that true power lies in humility. In the end, it's not how much you fight, but how much you grow." The officer nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep inside him. This wasn't just a lesson for his career, it was a lesson for life itself. And as he stood there, in the same courtroom where he had once defied her, he realized that his growth wasn't just a result of the judge's lessons. It had been his own willingness to face his weaknesses and learn from them that had truly transformed him. When he left her chambers that day, he felt different. He was no longer the rookie officer who had entered the courtroom months ago, full of pride and arrogance. He was a man who understood the value of respect, the importance of listening, and the power of humility. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments when his ego might flare up, when his pride might make him falter. But now, he was prepared to face those moments with a newfound strength, one born not of arrogance, but of wisdom. And as he walked out of the courthouse, a new chapter of his life began, one where his actions would speak louder than any words ever could. The lesson he had learned, the lesson that had been taught by a woman of strength and grace, would stay with him forever. The path to greatness was not through defiance, but through understanding. Through growth. Through humility. And that was the true measure of strength.